Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Transplant Strong Podcast. Today I'm joined by Jonathan. Jonathan is from Canada and he is a liver transplant like myself. Hi Jonathan, how are you?
Good, Danny. How are you, man?
Very, very good, very good. So tell me how you ended up having a liver transplant.
Yeah, so in my 20s, I was actually diagnosed with, I'm going to say Crohn's disease. My gastroenterologist sort of wavers between Crohn's disease and colitis in our discussions about it, but for lack of, or for better, I'll just call it Crohn's disease. And so that essentially over a 10-year long period, or even longer, I should say, ended up sort of evolving into also getting PSC, or primary sclerosing cholangitis. And so that was, I would say, in my 30s is when that was identified, and it was just identified through standard blood work, whereby my physician noticed that my liver enzyme numbers were sort of out of whack, as you would know. And so, my gastroenterologist monitored it, and we managed it with some medication, and sort of kept it at bay, really, for the most part. I mean, the interesting thing about the early parts of the journey was that I was sort of in the dark as to what PSC really meant, and I refused to sort of Google this kind of stuff, and I trust my doctors and my specialists with what they're telling me, and it worked out fine. I think it worked out the way it should have, but I did not know that the inevitable could or would be a liver transplant when you're diagnosed with PSC.
So that's not something the doctors discussed when diagnosed?
Yeah, not early on. Like they told me I had primary sclerosing cholangitis, but they didn't say, like, the end game is liver transplant, or there's the potential of liver transplant, and I almost kind of attribute it maybe to my gastroenterologist sort of old school, I'll call it, sort of approach.
Yeah.
Whereas I find now, based on sort of all the knowledge that we as patients have at hand, they're a little more upfront about it. I don't know if you've experienced sort of a similar approach or anything like that, but that was my sort of take on his approach.
Yeah, for me it was very different, really, because when I was diagnosed with Wilson's disease, at the time my liver was really, really bad, and they wanted to give me a transplant straight away. But I asked what the options were, and they said about medication. So for me, I was quite, I took that route. I was too young. I felt I was too young, and I was too scared to have a transplant. But for me, I always knew that, because they said to me, eventually you will need a transplant. So I have always known since diagnosis that eventually that would be the case.
Yeah. And so the journey to March 11th, which was 2024, which was my transplant date, was an interesting one in and of itself. And I think, so I received the gift of transplant from a living donor. My living donor was a complete stranger to me prior to donation.
Really?
It was, so I did a fairly large scaled, I would call it, in relation to me at least, social media campaign through a local magazine is really what sort of helped take the conversation off. And so I did a video shoot with this magazine, and they posted it on their social media, and then that went through to my friends, and essentially a friend of mine, who is a friend of my donor Jessica, sort of posted it on her social media that I was looking for a living donor, and Jessica actually had plans to donate a kidney to a young female through a local hospital in Toronto called Sick Kids. And just the way you know, God works and the world works. She ended up getting a kidney through a deceased donor. And so Jessica was no longer needed for her, but felt compelled to still sort of help in some way, shape, or form in this way. And again, my story crossed her path, and she felt to take the opportunity to see if she was a match for me, and she was.
That's really interesting, because was this something that the hospital said to you, like, we advise you to go out and try and find a living donor, or is it
Absolutely.
something you sort of took on yourself?
Yeah, good question. So absolutely. So I'm sure you know about the MELD scoring program.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was slightly early for that. My primary care physician was the one that actually suggested I push to get on the transplant list, because I was still, I'm going to say, quote unquote, relatively healthy.
Yeah.
And so we pushed to get on the list, and thankfully to my liver specialist as well, who sort of advocated for me to get on the list. Now, that said, I was far down the list because I was still fairly healthy, but I was on the list nonetheless. And
Yeah.
so, in conjunction with that, yes, the recommendation was go, and your best path to successful transplant is going to be if you put the power in your own hands and get a living liver donor, because the higher you move up on that list, obviously, the sicker you are, the more desperate you are for
Yeah.
a transplant.
So what was your quality of life like? I presume you was on quite a few meds.
Yeah, I think so. Fatigue was huge. The itchiness associated to, the degradation of the liver
Yeah.
was really annoying. I think associated with both would be the lack of sleep, and more of a nuisance than anything, and sort of kind of just irked me was the ascites, mainly in my ankles and stuff. And
Yeah.
I was always a very fit guy, very active, and just to see my ankles like swollen to the degree they were, or my gut swollen to the degree it was with all the water retention, it was it wasn't painful by any means, but it was kind of more depressing than anything.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I remember sometimes when my ankles were swollen up in the past, and yeah, they just become massive, and then you end up sitting there elevating them,
Yeah.
trying to bring down the swelling. But yeah, I can totally relate with that. And like you say, you don't feel yourself.
Yeah, and it's like, you go, like, we had taken a vacation to Florida, for instance, right? I'm in Florida. I'm like, well, we know what's going to happen in this hot, humid weather,
Yeah.
right? It's just going to make things even worse. And so,
Yeah.
the first time I actually noticed it was on a work trip. I was at a conference in Las Vegas, and I had come back from a walk, and which is odd, because usually when you're in motion, things sort of tend to get a little better. But I had come back from this walk, and my ankles were just swollen. So I initially attributed it to, just the heat, and like I said, the humidity or what have you. But then, as it progressed and happened more, and I started to sort of mention it to my gastroenterologist at the time, because I wasn't seeing my liver specialist yet, he had mentioned, yeah, that's associated to the PSC.
Yeah, very interesting. So you did this campaign, which I'm pleased it turned out successful, and you met this lady that was offered to be a donor. So then she reaches out to you, and then she goes to the hospital and has all the tests?
She did. And what I should say, in the spirit of this conversation, is that my best friend um, actually tried to be a donor himself as well, and I get choked up talking about it,
Yeah.
because uh, and he tried everything possible. He was a match, and the unfortunate thing is that his liver, just by chance, is 6% smaller than the average person's. It will have no bearing on his life moving forward. But he couldn't donate. They refused to. He said, "Do it anyways," and they refused him.
Yeah, that's so nice. So nice. I mean, if you got friends like that, then you know it's a friend for life.
Yeah.
And
what
was the lady's name that donated?
Jessica.
Jessica. What a great thing.
Yeah. And so yes, she indeed went through all the testing, and the interesting part, and maybe you've had these in previous discussions, is that not only is there the medical side of the discussions, but there's also the mental side of the discussions, which was an interesting sort of portion that I didn't fully appreciate at the time.
No, so I don't think most people do.
Yeah. And those were things like, like this person could go, away and live a really terrible life after, and not, be very good to their liver, let's say. And that's something that you have to sort of accept, really, if you're going to go through with this, right? And so, she definitely approached it cautiously, I would say, like in conversations when we met, to the point where, like, she even asked her friend, like, it is, and I felt that it was a valid question. Like, and some people get a little sort of, their ears perk up when I say this, but she actually asked, "Is he worth it?" And I thought that was interesting, but I thought it was a valid question, right? Like, she's giving a part of her body to somebody, and it's a big surgery.
Huge. I mean, from what I've been told as well, is on this occasion, it's the person that's donated, is their recovery can take longer and be harder than the person that's actually received the liver.
So I've not necessarily heard that. Her recovery was seemingly fairly straightforward in the conversations we had. She actually left the hospital earlier than they requested her to.
Yeah.
But she was up and about, like, pretty quick. I don't know the exact timeline, but she was up and about pretty quick, and felt really good not too far after. So, I think her recovery, I don't know any other experiences per se, but I think her recovery was, I would say, pretty close to run of the mill.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think she did fairly well.
It's an incredible thing to do, because I mean, it's hard enough to get people to sign up to be a deceased donor. So someone that sort of, I wouldn't mind maybe if after this, if you could maybe reach out to her, because I'd love to have her on a podcast and sort of talk about her mindset going into it, because it's very interesting.
Yeah, I'll definitely reach out. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it must have been weird, because you're kind of going on, like you're saying, you're meeting up. It's kind of like going on dates, and just to see if you're compatible and whether, was there pressure there on your behalf as well?
It is such a exhilarating and weird, and like the emotional sort of roller coaster of meeting your donor. And I was kind of in part having this conversation with my wife yesterday, because what I said to my wife Sabrina yesterday was that I still don't believe that Jessica is actually a real person.
Yeah.
It's like this is not real. This is like an angel of some sort. And so the meetup was incredible. I was a complete mess, as you would expect. It was beautiful, though. We met, I met her husband. Unfortunately, her kids couldn't come, but my kids were there, and we had a nice meal together. And you know what? What it really did, more so than it did for me, was give my family the opportunity to ask her questions. And my daughter actually asked, like, why? It was just a simple question, why? And she said, because I want to make sure your dad is around for you.
I was going to say, I mean, meeting the family and seeing you with a family is an extra reason for you to do it, isn't it? Because like she said, she wants to make sure it's not just for you, is it? It's for your family. Then it becomes for the kids and their future, which is a very selfless thing to do, though, because like you said, I mean, there must be risks involved on her side. And if she's got a husband and she's got children, it's a very, very kind thing to do.
Yeah, and like there's just, I mean, even just surgery day, the doctor sort of reviewing everything with me, telling me that she's in surgery now, and you'll be next, and obviously, and you know, there's some time boundaries around that, but I was in hospital, ready to go, like I went the night before and all that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, like that whole experience as well was a pretty um I don't know, sort of an emotional roller coaster. I think the first thing that comes to mind, and I haven't had a chance to touch base with the nurse, the gentleman there was just this big, burly black gentleman. I think it's right to paint the picture of him because he was wheeling me into the surgery room, and here I am, sort of looking overhead him, and he taps me on the shoulder when he drops me off, and he says, "Happy New Year, my friend." And I was just like, if there's anything that someone could say to me at that point, just to put me a little more at ease, given the nature of what was about to transpire, like he just said the most perfect thing to me.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I always, like you say, I don't know how it works in the Canadian hospitals, but in English hospitals, you have porters who basically their job is just to wheel you from the ward to have a scan or have like that. But I find them people can be so good because it's your 10 minutes off the ward sometimes if you've been on the ward a long time. And yeah, they can make your day, they can change your day, they can just say things that, you haven't thought about or give you a different perspective. Like they're very they're not just someone that wheels you from A to B. Like they can be someone that is, they've seen it, they've been there, they're experienced around it, and like you say, they can just sometimes say something that puts you at ease, especially because all the doctors and everyone like this are telling you the hard, cold facts, and it
Yeah,
can be a bit
yeah,
scary.
yeah. Exactly. I think and I've had a few different experiences with individuals in the same regard. Like, I mean, I remember even being wheeled out for an ultrasound at one point, and I just started talking about sneakers with one of the gentlemen, which is, I mean, we can get into that as well, but that is a big sort of part of my life now as a hobby. But we just sort of had a casual conversation, and I think to your point, it just sort of takes your mind away from the rigor, the constant conversation about your health, and I think that can be really taxing on people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's like that tiny, not back to normal. Well, I suppose back to normality really, because you're just having a conversation with someone that
Yeah,
they say is not around your health. It's because
absolutely.
yeah, because there was the hospital I stayed in. There's a lot of sort of Caribbean people that work there, and I remember just talking about food, and it was just like you said, it was just a big escape, just to even talk about that and like not talk about the medical stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about food, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the hospital food, and that I should say, at least in the hospital that was I was in for transplant patients, needs a lot of work.
Oh
Needs a lot
hell,
of
yeah.
work.
I mean, it's across the board. I mean, I don't think nutrition is taken as important as it is. And like you say, when you're recovering from an operation, the food really is very important. The food that
Yeah,
you're putting into your body and everything. But yeah, yeah, that's a whole subject in itself, isn't it? Really.
yeah.
Yeah. So you had this. You both had the operations. It turned out really well. Jessica has left hospital, and you're still recovering. How was your recovery?
Yeah, I think overall it was really good. I So in hospital, like, I think generally speaking, they were very happy with my progress. I did not go to ICU, so I went to what they call step down,
Yeah.
which is sort of one level in between sort of a standard room and ICU, and where you're a little sort of monitored a little closer in a group setting. And I didn't spend too long in there either. Then I moved to my longer term stay room or what have you, and things just sort of progressed as they should. And medication was sort of adjusted as they told me along the way, and you know um, in this community, we always talk about it being more of a dance than a science with medication. And so they were playing with that along the way as my liver sort of started to adapt and, ensuring, it was not rejecting and all that kind of thing. And so generally speaking, yeah, I was up and about walking. I made a point to walk a lot. And, at the beginning it was exhausting. It was tough. But as I got closer to the date that I went home, I think I was in the hospital for just under 2 weeks. I was, I felt very comfortable sort of just walking around on my own, albeit, a massive scar still to deal with, and I needed help at home and stuff like that. But in hospital, the recovery was great.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember before I had mine, I was trying to move out to my own flat or place, and they recommended against it. And I was like, oh, I'll be fine. But luckily I didn't, because I don't know why, but I just didn't expect the enormity of it. And you wake up and you have this huge scar. It's all bruised. And yeah, like you say, you are in no fit state to be trundling up and down stairs, carrying things, doing anything. Like, it's literally a few footsteps each day to start off with.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I remember, I remember the feeling to a degree, but I think it's funny how quickly the pain that you went through and that kind of stuff kind of escapes you. I have to really sit back and think about those days, those early days, a little more to better understand it. But I mean, if we moved to recovery at home, that became a little bit of a different story, because I ended up acquiring the name of it slips my mind, but a bowel infection essentially, and they put me on a medication, vancomycin, and that, we believe there's a couple different theories on how that went, but we believe that there was some sort of clash with my medication, whereby I basically lost my memory for like 3.5 weeks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I woke up one morning and I don't remember this, but my wife, I went, asked my wife, like, what happened? Like, why do I have this massive scar? And what did I go through? And she instantly messaged in our sort of portal to my doctor, like, this guy has completely lost all sense of what is going on in his life, has lost all his memory, doesn't know anything. And for the greater part of 2 weeks, I was basically mute. I didn't speak. I didn't really respond to much. And they had basically come back and said, it likely is this medication. It should get better. We'll keep an eye on it. And it slowly did get better. The progression was slowly. I think it was over like a month and a half. So I wasn't driving. I wasn't, doing any of that. And thankfully, it has come back. To say that I am absolute 100% recovered from it is tough. I would say I'm like 99% or 98 even, because I still have sort of memory challenges sometimes. And I know, like, from a work standpoint, memory comes into play a lot for me. And sometimes I get a little foggy, I would say, when it comes to that. So I'm more like 98% recovered from it.
Yeah.
Now, the second theory is that my body just couldn't handle, like,
Stress.
my brain couldn't handle the stress anymore. It just hit the reset button.
Yeah, because that's what I was kind of thinking as well, was it does body trauma, basically. Your body just sort of, your brain just says, I've had enough, I can't deal with this, and you go into autopilot, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that must have been more worrying for your wife and your family than you, because you don't remember, but they did.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So extremely concerning for my wife. My kids, poor things. I mean, my daughter's 17, my son's 15, so they fully get what's going on, and they were trying to live their lives, I guess, and traumatized by it all, for sure. But when I started getting my memory back, I think the biggest concern for me personally was, okay, I'm starting to get it back. Will I get it fully back? And then you start having the conversations with yourself about, okay, if I don't get it fully back, can I even work? Can I support my family? What does this mean long term? Am I basically, my wife going to become slave to me to a degree? Like, all these sort of
Yeah.
really convoluted thoughts start going through your head.
Yeah, worrying. But you, like you say, like you're you're 98% better, and I know you're definitely working on plenty of things now because you do your trainers, which I've seen, which are awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
And you've joined the team of Move for Life, who are a great group of people. I've had Gillian on, I've had Gray on. So yeah, tell us a bit more about those then. So you have recovered as well as you have. So how is your life now?
Yeah, it's great actually. I actually just took a side by side picture of myself from I would say about 3 months prior to transplant to yesterday. And so 3 months prior to transplant, I weighed 145 pounds.
Yeah,
And I weigh 175 now. So I've gained 30 pounds back.
massive difference.
Yeah, and I would like to think that most of it is muscle. I work out a lot. There's some fluff there for sure, but
It's just been Christmas, so we're allowed a little bit of fat.
yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, that recovery is great. As you mentioned, even prior to transplant, I think it was definitely it is definitely an escape for me, which is the customization of sneakers. And so I basically, in a nutshell, what I do is artwork on sneakers. And I started this before COVID, or just sorry, during COVID, I should say. And it all spawned off a pair of sneakers that I saw my nephew get done by one of his friends, and said, and I really think I could probably do this a lot better.
Yeah.
I've got some art in the family. My aunt's an artist. My brother's phenomenal artist, and in the graphic design world a little bit. And so, I took a stab at it, and it just absolutely took off.
Had you painted
Yeah.
before? Yeah, you've painted and.
So
Or did you
actually, I took an
literally just say, I'm
entrepreneur.
going to do trainers, and you went straight in?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like I knew I had it in me because in high school I was fairly good at it. Um, and but like after high school, I really sort of didn't do much at all.
Yeah.
And but I was, always sort of into it. I was inclined. I liked, sort of the artsy space and stuff. So I knew I could tackle this and do a good job at it. And yeah, so I mean, I've shipped sneakers globally for people that are interested in, and typically it's done through Instagram. That's where the
Yeah.
the main source of my business is. Yeah.
And what's your Instagram handle?
905 clean with a KLEAN kicks KICKS.
Yes. I will share the tag below this video. So if anyone wants to go
Great.
and check it out, which I highly recommend, even just go and give you a follow and just go and look at the designs, because there's some really, really cool trainers in there.
Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've joined the team for Move for Life.
Yeah. So this was the chain of events. There was really I met I don't know if it was post or prior to transplant, but through Instagram met Gray.
Yeah.
And we started having some conversations, and he has been an absolute rock for me through the post transplant process, and sort of helping me, sort of guiding me through some of the questions that I had. And has this happened to you? Has that happened to you? What do you, some advice, that kind of thing. And so I met Gray. He actually came to visit me after my transplant as well. And through Gray, I started following Jill, and then I found out that Jill had Move for Life, and then got involved in this year's Move for Life walk,
Yeah.
and participated in the walk. And then as part of that, I figured, I've got these trainers. They've got some prizes that they're looking to sort of give out, and so what I ended up doing was to the top fundraiser, I donated a pair of custom sneakers to that individual, which I'm going to be working on in the next few weeks.
That's so cool. So cool.
Yeah.
And what role did you take up there?
So I am now, I try to remember this properly, I'm the Director of Network and Community Engagement.
Ooh, sounds good.
Yeah, so I'm really in the midst of defining that role. It's a completely new space for me. But I am having some conversations with some cool individuals. Like literally just had one prior to this call about maybe an additional sort of networking opportunity. I can't really share right now, but I could share if I wanted to. I just don't want to put anyone else in a position.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's fun. It keeps me really busy. I don't know if I'm sort of overextending myself a little bit, but you know, I don't like to stay still.
Yeah, I think after you have the transplant, you just kind of like want to take on everything, especially when you get better. Because, well, for me, I remember just sitting around doing nothing, and I said to myself, I never want to have nothing to do. So even if I'm in hospital, I still want to have something to do. So like, you know, I could record these podcasts from hospital, and I could do all of this from hospital, really. So it was another reason that I wanted to, you know, set this up, and alongside everything else that I do, but really.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm really excited sort of about this, you know, I'll call it next chapter of Move for Life, because I think moving forward now, they built out a full board of directors, and you know, they're looking to really expand beyond the sort of smaller community that we had. It's been at present, it's been in London, Ontario, and Saskatchewan in Canada. Um, the inevitable, I'm going to call it inevitable, is that we'd like to expand as big really as possible, and you know, the sky's the limit. So I think with the group that we have on hand, you know, we really are looking for sort of some big achievements in 2025, which I'm definitely looking forward to.
I love what you guys do as well. So it's always good to keep an eye. So again, anyone listening to this, if you go and follow Move for Life, they're on Instagram. I'm presuming they've got Facebook as well. But yeah, they're just, you know, sort of started off with Jill doing a big swim, but she's built, you know, there's been an incredible team built around that. So
yeah,
like you say, some exciting things.
I like to say, so I'm heavily into cycling. I used to be part of a cycling team in my mid to late 20s, 30s, and so I'm thinking, you know, maybe I can bring cycling into the mix for this group and of swimmers, because they're all predominantly swimmers for whatever reason.
Give yourself another challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
More work to do.
Yeah.
It's so good to see, you know, how well you're doing in a short space of time, really.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. Like I'm gonna say, sorry, did you want to finish your thought?
I was just gonna say, to me, I'd say you're still relatively fresh, you know, from transplant, really.
Yeah. I think the only thing I would mention is I think, you know, when people ask me how you're doing, I often say I'm doing very well. But I think, you know, just as well as I do, transplant doesn't come without its own set of issues, concerns on all fronts. And I think in part, you know, medical, like direct medical and data-driven medical issues, and even mental. And when I sort of think about the data aspect of it, or my blood work specifically, my liver enzymes have been really good, and then every once in a while they sort of shoot up a little bit, and then they're really good, and then they shoot up a little bit, and oftentimes it takes a little while for them to sort of settle back down. And that's been the experience, I would say, in the last 6 to 7 months. Initially up front, it was like mass panic. What is going on? I don't know how to handle this. And now you sort of like thinking back and think about it a little more and understanding the trends. I wouldn't say I'm fully comfortable with it by any means. It's still, every time it goes up, it's still concerning. But we've done liver biopsies, everything's come back normal. I was actually had one scheduled for tomorrow, and that got canceled because things have stabilized again. And basically, my doctor, Dr. Hirschfield, said, you know, it's not going to yield any good quality data points for us. So
Yeah.
there's no point in poking and prodding you again. Let's just
Yeah.
continue to monitor and see where this goes. But he seems to think that there's some sort of low-level inflammation in my bile ducts that's sort of causing this spike and then dropping down. But we can't get to the bottom of it yet. So, but like I said, I feel great. Now, you know, when I think about the mental aspect of it, that can be tough post-transplant. I thought, you know, when coming out, you think I got a liver transplant, you know, I'm gonna sort of work myself back to health, fitness and eating well and all that kind of stuff. And then you hit some of these roadblocks, and it really kind of sends your mind into a bit of a spiral. And you start thinking like, you know, where am I going with this? Where does this go? What direction, you know? And my doctors have always reassured me, both my post-transplant liver specialist and Dr. Hirschfield, who I'm now seeing again long-term, have reassured me, like, you know, basically their comment is there's lots of tools in the chest to manage whatever comes our way and what we need to manage. So rest assured, we will manage it, and we will sort of continue to monitor and make sure that you stay healthy. So that's the message that I have to keep trying to play in my head, so that I keep my mental health as good as possible.
Yeah, the doctors, like you said, they do have a war chest really of things that they can bring out if needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember when I'd had my transplant and I was having the weekly check still, and you know, the word rejection to a transplant patient is terrifying. And they rang me up and they said, there's something not quite right with your bloods. We just want you to come back tomorrow just to have some bloods done. And I said, well, you know, or no, they didn't even say tomorrow, actually. They just said, there's something not quite right with your bloods. Something. And I said, what does that mean? He said, well, it could mean that you're going into rejection. We'll see you in a week. And then he just kind of hung up. And then you're like, I'm just sat there like, oh, this is great. And then I had to tell myself, well, it can't be that bad because otherwise he'd have me in straight away. But
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like when I was having a similar conversation that it could be that, it was almost as if they were talking like that was best case scenario. Like best case scenario, you've got a little bit of rejection because all the other things might be a little more difficult. They're manageable, but might be a little more difficult to manage.
Yeah.
I was like, really? But okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And to go back to the mental side of things, for me, I found that the first sort of year really was like a physical recovery. I was so wrapped up in the physical recovery, get myself walking, get myself, you know, eating properly and all of this. Then when I was physically recovered, it was like I say, it felt like it was the second part was then the mental recovery for me, because then, you know, like I say, it was that time then I could start processing everything.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, that's, you know, it's been a lot.
Yeah. I think, I mean, slightly, I think I feel as though I've been kind of dealing with them both one and the same at the same time. You know, um, and I don't know, like to varying degrees, right? I mean, like you have your super highs, and then, you know, sometimes there's really, you know, lows when you know, like I said, when the blood work comes back off and your mind starts spinning about what this could be or couldn't be, or so I feel as though now at this point, it we understand that there's a bit of a pattern, and that, you know, I'm never comfortable with it, but I've got to sort of understand that I'm feeling good, I'm healthy. You know, I just got to replay I sort of a checklist of things that I play through in my head, that, you know, you feel good, you look good, because appearance matters in our scenarios, right? Like if you're starting to look jaundiced and that kind of thing, then there's issues, right?
Yeah.
So all those things considered, you know, and then it just becomes a day-to-day thing. Like today's good, so enjoy today.
Yeah.
One day at a time.
Very much so. That's great advice as well to anyone going through the whole process, really.
Yeah.
One day at a time.
I can't remember the account, but there was, I think you might follow them too. There was a an individual in our community that's celebrating a 6-year, I think, heart anniversary just today. She's a physician as well. And it's interesting. I mean, it's worth checking out her page because she's got a checklist of like 6 different things. And one of them sort of touches upon the mental health aspect of it. But yeah, I don't know if you recall or saw it today, but
I can't remember the account name, but I think I know what you mean. She's constantly posting transplant related things, advice and just her life in general.
yeah, she's got quite a big following. I think she's got like 15,000 plus
Yeah.
followers on Instagram, and like I said, a heart transplant. So I just started following her today.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like my Instagram sort of community is just constantly growing, and
Yeah.
you think how many people have had a transplant, but it's just loads.
Yeah, it's funny. Like every time either you post something about someone else or Gray or anyone in the community for that matter post something, I'm just like, yeah, you're in my community as a transplant person. We're following each other.
Yeah. The funny, we've just been on holiday and my girlfriend was in the swimming pool and she was talking to a guy in there and he'd had a liver transplant, but he's the opposite to me really. He said he went to one sort of get together of transplant patients and he found it not, I don't want to use the word disturbing, but he just he didn't find it that settling because there was people there that were still struggling, and he said he felt some sort of like guilt or whatever. So he said since that day he's had nothing to do with the transplant community as such, and he's just got on with his life.
That is, it's funny you mentioned that because there's some that I follow and it's not necessarily like, people will post about, having second transplants and whatever and struggling and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, I don't know if I can handle that right now. Like I'm not even a year out. And it's like, there's times where I've actually contemplated, just not necessarily unfollowing, but like temporarily muting some of the people that I follow in the transplant community because like I'm still sort of gathering things myself. The mental health is still a work in progress. And so it's almost like, it's a little too early on for me to sort of hear these type of conversations.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I remember I wrote a post about social media groups like Facebook especially but you could be in part of any group on Facebook, and the majority of people that post in them groups are sort of asking questions because something's not quite right. So in a transplant group, it would seem like most people that have transplants have rejection or have this, and then occasionally you'll get someone post like I'm 3 years in, which is great, but a lot of it is just people asking questions, which if you're sat on the outside looking in, it could look like all transplant patients have all these problems, but not everyone gets on there every day and says today was great, today was great, today was great. So they are very good, the groups, because you might be having a similar problem, you see someone post about it, and then there's a thread of people that are sort of answering. So it is very good, but you also have to remember that everyone's journey is completely different, and just because that's happened to someone else might not happen to you. So it's like you say, basically living every day one step at a time, knowing what the future could hold and sort of being as prepared as you can, but just enjoying every day while you can.
I think for me it's getting back to business as usual, which is I am now. I'm working full time. I've got my hobby on the side. Like I said, fitness is a big part of my life, and I think between fitness and eating well, I think let me control everything that I can control.
Yeah.
The physical, the mental, health of side of things, and what I put in my mouth. Outside of that, it's in God's hands. Is kind of what I say.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great way to finish as well, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's been really, really good talking to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, awesome conversation. I think time flies when you're sort of talking about a topic that you're near and dear to your heart. So I appreciate the time.
It's hard because there's so many times I could go off on a spiral as well, like we were talking about nutrition and things like that. But if there's no reason why you can't come back on in the future and we can talk about stuff.
Would love to. I think there's
Brilliant.
plenty of things we could talk about. So
yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Your week. You too.